My sister makes fun of me for being a single mother and calls me a failure, but she loses her job and comes to me for food, getting a taste of her own medicine. My sister and I have never had an easy relationship. Ever since we were little girls, it's always been competitive. Not in the fun way where you can laugh about it afterward, but in that exhausting kind of competition that leaves you questioning your self-worth. I remember when we were little, if I got an award at school, she'd minimize it by saying something like, "That's all? I can do better." Over the years, that hasn't changed. In fact, it's only gotten worse. Every little success of mine was an opportunity for her to make it seem insignificant, while her achievements were treated like grand feats. No matter what I did, it always felt like I was playing a game I could never win. Fast forward to now, I'm 32 years old and a single mother of a 6-year-old boy. My marriage was complicated, to put it mildly. We married young, and at first, everything seemed promising, but over time, it fell apart. My ex-husband wasn't the man I thought he was, and after years of broken promises and lies, I decided the best thing for my son and me was to end it. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but also one of the most liberating. Of course, when my sister found out, it was like she'd been given a script for her favorite comedy show. She wouldn't stop making snide comments, sometimes even in front of other family members. "Well, at least I won't die alone," she'd say with a forced laugh. "Maybe you should have chosen better." Obviously, not all of us have such good judgment as I do. And so it's been ever since. I'm a single mother, and I'm not ashamed to say it's been hard. I work full-time, juggle finances, and try to give my son as stable a life as possible. We don't live in luxury, but we have what we need, and my son is a happy and healthy child. Still, my sister never misses an opportunity to point out what she considers my failures. She says things like, "Don't you get tired of living like this, always running around like a machine?" I couldn't stand it. Or my favorite, "If you had stayed married, at least you wouldn't have to work so hard." The funny thing is, she doesn't say it to help or offer constructive advice. She says it with that condescending tone that makes you feel like an insect she could crush with her finger. It's that tone that makes me want to yell, "At least I'm doing something with my life instead of living off my husband's credit cards." But I never do. I bite my tongue because what's the point of arguing with someone who clearly has no interest in understanding you? Speaking of her husband, my sister has been married for 3 years to a man who, according to her, is Prince Charming. He has money, apparently a lot, because every time we see each other, she doesn't miss the opportunity to brag about their lifestyle. We went to the Maldives last summer. "Oh, right, I don't think you've been on vacation lately, have you?" "Well, never mind, not all of us are lucky enough to marry well." Or the time she said, "You know what he gave me for my birthday? A diamond necklace. Can you believe it? He told me he saw it and thought of me. Isn't he adorable?" These family gatherings are a minefield. I always go and hoping that this time will be different, that there won't be any malicious comments or unnecessary comparisons. But inevitably, at some point in the conversation, she throws a dart, something small but sharp enough to make me bleed. And there I am, sitting there pretending it doesn't affect me while my parents try to divert attention to prevent the situation from getting out of control. My mom, especially, always tries to defend me. "You shouldn't talk to her like that. She's doing a great job as a mother," she says. But my sister just smiles and replies, "I'm just telling the truth, Mom. Not everyone can handle reality like I do." What irritates me isn't just what she says, but the way she says it, as if her life is the pinnacle of success, as if she could never fall. She recently quit her job because, according to her, her husband told her she didn't need to work. He wants her to rest, to focus on herself. "Not all of us can afford that luxury, of course," she said. When she said that, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. I'm not one to judge, but leaving your financial independence in the hands of another person seems, at the very least, unwise. But of course, I didn't say anything. I learned a long time ago that commenting on my sister's life is like lighting a match near a barrel of gunpowder. Unnecessary and dangerous. What I did notice, and this is where things get interesting, is that in recent months, something in her has changed. She still brags about her perfect life, but she does it in a more forced way, as if she's trying to convince us, and maybe even herself, that everything is still ideal. There are times when a look of worry escapes her, or when she seems distracted, as if something is tormenting her. I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling. And although I don't wish ill on anyone, I can't help but feel a bit of curiosity, because life has an interesting way of balancing things out, and I have a feeling my sister's life is about to take an unexpected turn. Update 1. 3 months have passed since my last post, and as usual, life has not stopped surprising me. Sometimes I feel like the days fade between work, housework, and trying to keep my son happy and with everything he needs. However, even in the chaos of my daily routine, I can't help but notice that something has changed in the family dynamic, especially when it comes to my sister. In case you don't remember, my sister has always been the center of attention at every family gathering. Not because she's particularly interesting or charming, but because she simply makes sure to hog all the oxygen in the room. The last time we saw each other was during a dinner at our parents' house. She arrived, as always, impeccably dressed in clothes that cost more than I earn in a month, with her arrogant smile and that way of walking as if floating on a cloud of superiority. However, something was different. Even though she was still bragging about her perfect life, there was something strange about the way she did it. It was as if she was trying too hard. For example, during dinner, she started talking about her pregnancy, something she had announced a couple of weeks before in a spectacle worthy of a Hollywood movie. Yes, my sister is pregnant, and she didn't miss the opportunity to remind everyone how special this moment was. "You see, Mom," she said, stroking her barely swollen belly, "you always said that having children is a magical experience, but I think it will be even better for me because, well, I have a wonderful husband by my side who supports me in everything. I can't imagine going through this alone like some people." She didn't look directly at me, but she didn't need to. Everyone at the table knew who that comment was aimed at. I took a deep breath and forced myself to smile. My mom tried to change the subject, but my sister continued. She talked about how her husband was more excited than she was about the baby, how they were already planning to convert one of the rooms in their huge house into a dream nursery, and how he had told her to hire a nanny so she wouldn't have to wear herself out taking care of the baby. "He simply adores me. He loves me like a queen, and that's why he wants me to focus on myself during this special time," she added with a triumphant smile. But something in her eyes betrayed her words. Maybe it was my imagination, but there was a flicker of insecurity in her eyes. It wasn't much, just a blink, but it was there, as if she didn't quite believe what she was saying. After dinner, while I was helping my mom clear the dishes, I noticed my sister was sitting in the living room frantically texting. She seemed upset, even though she was trying to hide it. Later, I heard my parents talking softly in the kitchen. My dad, who normally doesn't get involved in family dramas, was saying to my mom, "Have you noticed that she doesn't talk about her husband so much anymore? Before, she wouldn't stop mentioning him, but now she barely mentions him." My mom nodded but didn't say anything else. I decided not to ask any questions because, honestly, I didn't feel like getting into more trouble with my sister. However, I couldn't help but wonder if everything was as perfect as she wanted us to believe. About a week after that dinner, she called me. This is rare because my sister and I almost never talk on the phone unless it's absolutely necessary. I answered more out of curiosity than anything else, and from the moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. "I can't believe how hard it is to be pregnant," she began in a whiny tone that almost made me laugh. "I'm exhausted all the time, and my husband says I'm exaggerating. Can you believe it? He thinks it's easy to carry this baby all day." For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. My sister, the same one who always made fun of me for being a single mother, was complaining about her husband's lack of support. I bit my tongue to keep from saying something sarcastic and simply replied, "Well, yes, pregnancy can be exhausting, but you have help, right? Surely he's there for you." There was an awkward pause before she answered. "Yes, of course," she said, but her voice didn't sound convinced. She quickly changed the subject and started talking about the nursery they were planning, but the conversation didn't flow naturally. Something was definitely wrong, even though she wasn't ready to admit it. For now, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I can feel that things are not as she paints them. And although I'm not going to lie, a part of me feels a kind of satisfaction seeing her falter a little. I also feel, because if there's one thing I've learned from my sister, it's that she'll always do everything possible to maintain the facade, even when everything around her is crumbling. Update 2: 6 months have passed since I last wrote, and I feel like everything in my life has continued its normal course. Work, take care of my son, pay bills, repeat. However, in my sister's life, things have taken a turn that I honestly never saw coming. Although if I think about it, maybe it was only a matter of time. To begin with, my sister finally had her twins a couple of weeks ago. Yes, twins. It turns out that all this time she had hidden from us that she was expecting 2 babies, not 1. According to her, she wanted it to be a surprise, but it seems more likely to me that she simply didn't want to admit that things were already more complicated than they seemed. The babies are beautiful, I'm not going to lie, and I was glad to see them healthy and strong. However, while everyone in the family celebrated the arrival of the new members, there was a dark cloud over the whole event. My sister's husband was not there. Let me back up a bit to explain how we got to this point. A few months ago, during her 3rd trimester, my sister started showing signs of stress that she simply couldn't hide. Even though she tried, her social media, which was always full of photos of her perfect life and of her and her husband at fancy dinners or on dream trips, suddenly became much quieter. In the few posts she did make, she focused exclusively on the pregnancy, as if her husband had disappeared from the narrative. Of course, no one in the family dared to ask her directly what was going on because, well, we all know what my sister is like. Anything that suggests that her life is not perfect turns into a personal attack. However, the truth finally came to light in the most unexpected way. It was during one of our family gatherings. My mom had organized a small meal to celebrate that the babies were due soon. And as always, my sister arrived late and with an attitude that seemed more tense than usual. She sat down, started talking about the preparations for the babies, and for a moment I thought it would be a quiet gathering. But then my dad, without knowing what he was about to unleash, casually asked, "And where is your husband? Isn't he coming?" The silence in the room was deafening. My sister stopped cutting her food and looked up, clearly annoyed. "He's busy with work," she replied, but her tone was curt, almost defensive. My mom, who has always been more perceptive than my sister gives her credit for, took the opportunity to ask something I'm sure we were all thinking. "Is everything all right between you two? We haven't seen him in a long time." It was at that moment that my sister finally broke down. She started crying, something she rarely does, and between sobs confessed what she had been hiding for months. Her husband had left her. According to her, it all started with small arguments about the pregnancy. He wasn't happy with the idea of having twins because, according to him, it would be too much work. At first she thought he was just nervous, but soon the arguments became more frequent and more aggressive, until finally he stopped pretending and told her the truth. He had been having an affair with an 18-year-old girl who worked as a waitress at a restaurant he frequented. Worst of all was how he did it. One day, without warning, he packed his things, left a note that basically said he needed a new beginning, and disappeared. My sister tried to contact him, but he blocked her number and cut off all contact. The only clue she has is that he apparently went to South America with his new partner, Brazil or Argentina, according to what she was able to deduce from some comments he dropped before leaving. To be completely honest, I didn't know how to react when I heard all this. A part of me felt sorry for her. No matter how difficult our relationship has been, I wouldn't wish that kind of abandonment on anyone, especially during pregnancy. But another part, a small but loud part, couldn't help but remember all the cruel comments she made when my marriage ended. Remember when she told me I was a failure because my husband left me? Or when she boasted that she would never have to worry about something like that because she had chosen well? Well, here she was now, in the same position as me, only, arguably, in an even more complicated situation. Since that day, my sister has been living with my parents because she can't afford to pay the rent on her huge house. It turns out that although she always boasted about her luxurious lifestyle, much of it was financed by her husband, and without him, she simply can't maintain it. My parents, of course, took her in, but even they are starting to feel the burden. Having 2 newborns at home is not easy, especially when your adult daughter is not contributing at all because, well, she never thought she'd have to work again. For my part, I've tried to keep some distance. Although I feel sorry for her, I'm also tired of always being the one who has to put up with her comments and attitudes. Now that her perfect life has fallen apart, she seems to be realizing that it's not as easy as she used to say. But for now, I'm waiting. Update 3: a year has passed since my sister brought her twins into the world. And although I thought things couldn't get any more complicated for her, it seems life has found ways to show me there's always a new low. It's funny how circumstances change you, although in my sister's case, it seems that humility is still a concept that resists her. To recap a bit, after her husband abandoned her and fled to South America with an 18-year-old girl, my sister moved back in with my parents. At first, we all assumed it would be a temporary solution. After all, this is the same woman who always boasted about being self-sufficient and having a plan for everything. But the months began to pass, and her stay at our parents' house stopped feeling like a transition and started to look more like a permanent installation. The twins, while adorable, are a huge burden, especially for my parents, who should already be enjoying their retirement. My mom, being the generous person she is, completely devoted herself to helping them. Cooking, taking care of them while my sister rested, and even taking money out of her savings to buy diapers and formula. My dad, on the other hand, was clearly more exhausted, although he tried not to say anything to avoid confrontations. However, it wasn't hard to notice that they were both at their limit. Meanwhile, my sister seemed to be in a complete state of denial. For the first few months, she kept acting as if all this was a temporary setback. She said things like, "I'll find a solution soon," or "I'm waiting for the chaos of the first few months with the babies to pass, and then I'll get my life back on track." However, that solution never came. What did come was an increasingly demanding attitude towards my parents, as if it were their responsibility to bear the consequences of her decisions. On one of the visits I made to my parents' house, I witnessed an argument that perfectly summed up the situation. My mom was in the kitchen, clearly exhausted, preparing bottles while one of the twins was crying. My sister was sitting on the sofa with her phone in hand, complaining about how tired she was. She wasn't helping, she wasn't moving, she was just complaining. "You know what you need, Mom," she said in a tone that left me speechless. "A nanny. Someone who can help you handle this, because it's clear that I can't do it alone." My mom looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "A nanny? And how do you plan to pay for that, dear? Or do you expect me to cover that too?" My sister grimaced and looked away at her phone. "I don't know, Mom. I'm just saying we need help." At that moment, I had to intervene. "We need help? No, sister. You need help. They're already doing more than they should. You're the mother, not them." My tone was harsher than I had planned, but I was sick of seeing her so comfortable letting everyone else carry the weight of her problems. She looked at me with narrowed eyes and made a comment that, honestly, was the last straw. "Well, you can't understand because you only have one child. And besides, you are always more conformist. That's why it doesn't bother you so much to live the way you do." I'm not gonna lie, I was stunned. That same old, condescending attitude, even now that she was broke. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. But all I could answer was, "The difference between you and me is that I never expected anyone else to solve my problems. Maybe you should try it sometime." After that, the tension between us reached a new level. I stopped visiting her at my parents' house as often because I honestly didn't have the patience to deal with her. But things didn't improve. A couple of months later, she called me unexpectedly. The last time we'd spoken had ended in an argument, so I wasn't sure why she would want to talk to me now. I answered out of curiosity, and what I heard on the other end of the line was something I never thought would come out of her mouth. "I need your help," she said in an almost pleading tone. That phrase completely took me by surprise. My sister, asking for help? At first I thought it was some kind of joke, but she continued talking. She explained that my parents were starting to lose patience with her and that they had given her an ultimatum. Either she found a job to contribute to the household expenses, or she would have to find another place to live. "They don't understand how hard it is to have 2 babies, she complained. "You understand, right? As a single mother, you know how difficult it is to raise a child without support." That phrase, that comparison was like a slap in the face. Everything I had endured from her for years came back to me. All the times she called me a failure, all the mockery about my modest life, all the comparisons that always put her on a pedestal. And now here she was trying to put herself in the same position as me, as if she had never said any of that. My answer was simple. "Yes, I know how hard it is, but I learned to deal with it on my own, and I think you can too." There was a long silence before she answered. Does that mean you're not going to help me? It means it's time for you to learn what it means to be independent, I said before hanging up. I don't know if it was cruel, but it was what I felt I needed to say. After all, she never had any qualms about belittling my life. Now it was her turn to face reality. Update 6 months have passed since I told my sister that she had to learn to be independent. And although I thought that would mark a before and after in her attitude, it seems that the lesson has taken longer to arrive than I expected. It's not that I wanted to see her suffer, but after everything she had said and done, I honestly felt it was fair that she face the consequences of her own decisions. However, what has happened in these months has been a mixture of chaos, drama, and moments that not even I could have imagined. After that call in which she asked for help, and I denied her the rescue she was looking for, my sister entered a kind of state of denial, something I discovered through my parents. According to them, during the first few weeks after my response, she continued to behave as if nothing had happened, as if my rejection didn't really mean a problem. She even tried to manipulate my parents into backing down on their ultimatum. "How do you expect me to find a job with 2 babies?" she would say dramatically whenever they brought up the subject. My mom, being the soft-hearted woman she is, tried to explain to her that we were all willing to help her with the twins, but that she had to take the first step and look for something, anything, that would allow her to start earning money. My dad, on the other hand, was much more direct. "You have no choice, dear. This isn't sustainable. We're not going to be here forever." At first, it seemed that my dad's words hadn't made a dent in her, but then a couple of weeks later, something happened that finally shook her up a bit. One of the twins, the smaller one, had a respiratory problem and had to be rushed to the hospital. Although everything turned out to be under control after a few hours, the medical bills arrived quickly, and that's when my sister really began to understand what it meant to have no income of her own. According to my mom, she spent days crying in her room, complaining about how unfair her life was. "How did I get to this?" she repeated over and over, as if someone else was to blame for what was happening to her. My mom tried to comfort her, but my dad was colder. "You got to this because you got used to depending on others," he told her bluntly. "It's time for you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Finally, after weeks of complaints, tears, and arguments, my sister made what I think was the first responsible decision she has made in years. She signed up with a local employment agency. At first, she was full of excuses about why she couldn't work. "I don't have recent experience. No one's going to hire a mother with twins. How am I going to find something that pays me enough?" But my parents stood firm, and little by little she realized she had no other choice. The transition to the working world was not easy for her, and I can't say I was surprised. She had spent years bragging about not having to work thanks to her husband, and now she had to start from scratch. She got a part-time job at a clothing store, a position that, according to her, was far below her capabilities. "This is not for me," she told me one day when I saw her in my parents' house. "I can't believe my life has come to this." I couldn't help but reply, "Well, at least now you're learning what it means to work hard to get ahead. It's a good start." My comment, although sincere, clearly didn't please her, but I didn't say anything else. If I've learned anything during this process, it's that sometimes it's better to let people reach their own conclusions. As the months went by, her attitude began to change, albeit very slowly. She started to participate more in raising the twins, something she had honestly been largely delegating to my parents. She also started looking for ways to save money, which was new for someone who previously had no qualms about spending hundreds of dollars on a single handbag. However, what struck me most was that she began to show small glimpses of humility, something I thought I would never see in her. For example, a couple of weeks ago, in a conversation we had while I was helping my mom with the twins, she told me something that almost made me fall out of my chair. "I didn't know how hard it was," she admitted in a tone that seemed genuine. "I always thought that people like you were in that position because they weren't trying hard enough. But now I see that it's simply not as easy as I made it seem in my head." That moment was like a small personal triumph for me. Not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because she finally seemed to be understanding something I had tried to explain to her for years. Despite these small advances, things are still not perfect. My sister still has moments where she falls into old patterns of behavior, complaining about how unfair it all is, or comparing herself to the people who still have the life she used to have. But I think she's starting to accept that the only way forward is to keep working and take responsibility for her actions. For my part, I continue to maintain some emotional distance. I help when I can, but I've learned that I can't solve her problems for her. And although there is still a lot to do, I think she is finally on the right track. Or at least I hope so, because if there is one thing I have learned during this process, it is that real change takes time, effort, and above all, will. Does my sister have that will? I don't know for sure yet, but for the first time in a long time, it seems like she's trying to find it. Final update: life has a cruel and ironic way of surprising you, and I honestly thought I had already seen everything that could happen in my sister's saga. But as if it were a bad taste novel, fate had one last card up its sleeve, and believe me when I tell you it was the most unexpected blow of all. This is the final chapter of this chaotic story, and although I should have felt bad about how it all ended, I can't help but think that there are people who simply don't learn, no matter how much life beats them down. Since my last update, my sister had made some progress. Her part-time job at the clothing store turned into a full-time job, and although she still complained about how much she hated working, at least she was starting to be more responsible with her finances. My parents, although still exhausted, began to see some improvement in her attitude. She even seemed more involved in raising the twins, and for the first time in a long time, it seemed like she was finding something resembling stability. However, all this changed a few weeks ago when the past decided to return, literally, to her door. It was a normal day, or as normal as it could be in our family. I was at home reviewing some work papers when I received a call from my mom. Her voice sounded nervous, as if she had just witnessed something completely out of the ordinary. "Your sister has a visitor," she said in a low tone, as if she didn't want anyone else to hear her. "What kind of visitor?" I asked, already sensing that something was wrong. There was a pause before she answered. "It's her husband. Well, her ex-husband. He's back." I don't know exactly what I felt at that moment. I guess a mixture of disbelief, anger, and, I'll admit it, a bit of morbid curiosity. After all that had happened, after abandoning my pregnant sister and running off to South America with an 18-year-old girl, now he decided to come back? Later that day, I talked to my sister, and what she told me was so ridiculous that I could hardly believe it. According to her, her ex-husband showed up at my parents' door, looking much more haggard than any of us remembered. He wasn't the haughty, self-assured man she used to brag about. He looked tired, defeated, as if he had aged 10 years instead of 2. He said he made a mistake. My sister explained to me in a tone that oscillated between confusion and hope that the girl he left with ruined him, that she left him with no money and abandoned him in Brazil after getting pregnant. Yes, you read that right. It turns out that the 18-year-old girl, now 19, with whom he ran away, got pregnant. But according to him, she left him broke before abandoning him. According to his words, she was immature and selfish, and after months of arguments and problems, she decided to get rid of him and continue her life alone. He, without money and without resources, spent some time in Brazil working at whatever he could until he finally saved enough to return to the United States. And now here he was back begging my sister to give him a second chance. Needless to say, I was furious. A second chance? After everything he did to her? After abandoning her while pregnant, taking all her money, and leaving her family in ruins? But the worst part was that my sister, incredibly, seemed to be considering the idea. "He says he wants to fix things," she told me, as if that were enough to justify everything. That he now realizes what he had with me. That he wants to be a good father to the twins. And what if he's really changed? What if this is our chance to rebuild our family? I tried to talk to her, to reason with her, to remind her what had happened the last time she trusted him. I reminded her of the months of tears, the debts, the hard work to get ahead, everything she had done to rebuild her life. But nothing I said seemed to matter to her. "He was my husband," she insisted, "and we all make mistakes. Maybe he really deserves a second chance." My parents, of course, were horrified. My dad, who has always been reserved, this time did not hold back. He told her directly that she was making a mistake, that trusting him again was crazy. But my sister, stubborn as ever, decided to go her own way. In a matter of weeks, she allowed her ex-husband to move back in with her and the twins. They started acting as if nothing had happened, as if they were a happy family. She even quit her job, convinced that this time he would really take care of everything. Of course, it wasn't long before the truth came out. At first, things seemed to be going well. He got a temporary job and started contributing to household expenses, although it always seemed like the money disappeared faster than it should. Then the arguments started, first small, then increasingly frequent and more intense. She called me a couple of times crying, saying that things weren't as perfect as she expected, but still insisting that they could fix it. The final blow came a few weeks ago when, after a particularly big argument, he simply disappeared. He took what little was left of my sister's savings and left a note basically saying he wasn't ready for this life and that he needed to find his own way. It was like an exact repeat of what had happened before, but this time my sister was completely devastated. Now here we are. My sister is once again in my parents' house, without a job, without savings, and, in her own words, with no idea how to move forward. Although I don't like to see her suffer, I also feel that this was a lesson she had to learn the hard way. For my part, I have decided to keep my distance. I can no longer spend any more energy trying to save someone who doesn't want to save herself. My parents continue to help her, although this time it seems that even they are at the end of their rope. And me? Well, I just hope she has finally learned something from all this. But if I'm honest, I don't have much hope.